Penn State On Demand is a service of Penn State Public Broadcasting, and now you can support WPSU when you shop online. Visit WPSU.org/shop to make purchases from national online retailers, and WPSU will receive a portion of the sale with no extra cost to you. So start your online shopping at WPSU.org/shop.
I do some consulting work on American
feeling in the room was
don't ever say to her that what about the shower?
Introductory discussion on the ethical more of a community.
Before China took back over.
currently doing in autism.
The years may pass, the weaponry and public opinion may change, but one thing about war remains constant: the bond it creates between the men and women who serve. In honor of Veterans Day, this special episode of Conversations brings together servicemen and women from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and Iraq to tell their stories. It also gives viewers an inside look at their shared sacrifice. We're joined by 4 local veterans, and we'll talk with them about their military service, about how the experience changed them, and about what Veterans Day means to them. Here's our conversation. Our guests are Lieutenant Ray Fortunato, who served during World War II from 1943 to 1946 with the 78th Infantry Division in Germany. Sergeant Murray Schoenholtz served 2 years in the Army during the Korean War from 1950 to 1952. Colonel Lewis Watt dedicated 26 and a half years to the Marine Corps and served 2 tours in Vietnam as a Marine aviator. And Petty Officer 3rd Class Maggie Kwok spent 5.5 years in the Navy and served in Operation Iraqi Freedom. Thank you all so much for joining us. I want to begin with Sergeant Murray Schoenholtz, and this is a question I want to ask of all of you, and that is how you came to serve in the military. What branch did you serve in, and how did you choose?
Well, I served in the Army, and there was a local division, National Guard, that I joined with a lot of friends, and then we were activated, sent to Fort Sill for basic training, and then
Fort Sill, Oklahoma.
Yes.
Shipped to Korea in 1950.
Right, as a replacement.
Ray Fortunato.
I was a student here at Penn State. I came up to Penn State in September of 1941. 3 months later, Pearl Harbor hit. And immediately, the university changed its plans and eliminated all time off between semesters so that we could get as many semesters in as we could before we were called in service. I signed up for advanced ROTC and was selected for that, which is an enlistment, and I had to join the enlisted reserve at that time. So in May of 1943, about a couple of thousand enlisted reservists got called into the service all at the same time.
Do you remember exactly where you were on December 6, 1941? Pearl Harbor?
I was here at Penn State.
And you remember where you were on campus? And
we were so naive, and we didn't have television and blaring at us and everything. I remember people saying, "What's a Pearl Harbor?" I mean, we really were naive about what happened. And when we got the impact of it, some of my fraternity brothers quit school and joined the service right away. It was that dramatic.
how about for you, Maggie?
Well, after I graduated high school, I just felt like college I wasn't really ready for it yet, even though my parents really wanted me to go. You know, all my cousins, I grew up really close to my cousins, everybody went to college. I decided to join the military because I felt that was right, and I chose to become a Navy corpsman because my mom said the only way I will sign the waiver to let you enlist is if you get a job in the medical field. So I told that to my recruiter. She was like, okay, let's make you a corpsman, and that's how I ended up in there.
Now, an interesting thing, though, is you sign up, you're in high school, and September 11th, your teacher writes on the board, war.
Oh, yes, I was in my physics class. He was older. I think he was teaching for like 30 or 40 years, and it was on the TV. They called everybody, told all the teachers to turn the TV on, and we were watching it. And he's like, only one thing's going to happen to this. Only one thing's going to happen because of this. And he wrote war on the board.
And you knew what that meant for you. Well, not what you had anticipated.
I didn't think that was like in the fall of my senior year, so I wasn't contemplating the military yet. But after, in my spring semester, then I was like, wow, and then everything just started happening, shortly after 9/11, so.
And how about for you, Colonel Watt?
Well, I was a poor farm kid who got good grades in high school and had this wonderful conversation with a guidance counselor. And I remember saying, you can get me in a good college, but I can't afford to go. And he said, look at the Navy ROTC, which I did, and I succeeded in with that application. And during the 4 years at Tufts, met some very impressive Marines. So when it came time to choose between the Navy and the Marine Corps, I decided I'd be a Marine.
In one word, and I think I know what word you were going to use, in one word I'd like each of you to describe what your service has meant to you.
Oh, it was tremendously rewarding. It just, professionally rewarding for me personally.
I'm going to find out why in just a moment. For you, Maggie Kwok, is there a word to describe what that 5.5 years of service was?
There isn't. There were negative things that happened, and there were positive things that happened, but all in all, all of my experiences culminated in one great experience, and it was something that I'll never regret doing.
In fact, you have said that sometimes you step back, you're not that far removed, and say, I can't believe I've done the things I've done.
It's very surreal still. Very surreal.
How about for you, Ray Fortunato?
Well, one of the things that was amazing to me, I was very young as an officer, and we were given new assignments way beyond our years. And the fact that we had these opportunities to stretch ourselves and do things that we didn't realize we could do just made the experience very rewarding, in addition to serving our country at the time.
You were 21 leading 40 18-year-olds.
Yes, I was 21, and when I went into combat, the men in my platoon, it was about 40 men, were all 18 years old. And that's amazing to me.
How about for you?
Well, I think you grew up quickly, and you made some acquaintances from all over the country. It was a very interesting period. I made some lifelong friends.
Is that the same for all of you? Lifelong friends?
Absolutely. Absolutely. My best friends are the two individuals who I spent the most time in the cockpit with, flying those greasy old H-37s in 1966 and 67.
Now, you spent 26 and a half years in the military. An experience that, or a time that allowed all kinds of experiences for you. You were also a test pilot. What got you into planes?
I should put a footnote on this, that when I graduated, I became an infantry officer and did that for a year, and had some of the satisfaction that Ray had. The Vietnam War had not started yet, but I've finished a wonderful tour as a platoon commander, and I looked forward to what was available to me. And I said, it's time to go to flight school. I had the vision, literally the vision, and was able to pass the physical. So it was just time to do that. And later, to take that another step, the engineering degree kicked open the door to the test pilot school, and that just led to other things. That was wonderful.
Did you feel prepared for what you were expected to do? I'm wondering about boot camp and your training experiences.
Well, we had excellent training, but did I feel prepared to lead a group of people into combat? No. But pride takes over, and I think we all wonder as we go into combat, what are we going to be like? Are we going to be cowards? Are we going to be brave? And I can remember the first attack. I was in charge. I had to lead, and I did that. And then the training that I had kicked in, and I guess the training prepared me for that. It didn't prepare me for later on when I was told, we're going to move you to become a battalion intelligence officer, because I had to start over again in my learning curve.
You said, I didn't meet anybody in combat who wanted to be a hero. We were scared to death most of the time.
That's right. We really were. Yeah, but the adrenaline came up, and we had to do things, so we did them. But we were scared all the time, no question about it.
One of the most vivid memories for you of Korea was cold.
Yeah, I remember that. It was bitter cold. And you'd go to bed at night, and you'd say, oh, I hope I don't have to get up to go to the bathroom. That was a scary thought.
Well, I'm wondering, as a Korean War veteran and a World War II veteran, you know, how similar are your experiences? I mean, have you talked with many World War II veterans, and is it something that you're curious to know how different or similar your experiences have been?
Well, I think it was an interesting time. I remember when I was in high school, the feeling, you know, guys couldn't wait till they became 18 to go in the Army. I mean, it was a great feeling of patriotism and looking forward to serving your country. Did you find that too?
You said it was cold. The coldest winter I think Germany ever had was the winter we were in combat in 1944-45. And I remember shivering most of the time.
Yeah.
It was dreadfully cold. Yeah.
Now, for you, you said World War II, and I think no one would disagree that it was a war like no other. This was a shared national sacrifice. Everyone was committed to this effort.
The thing that was amazing to me is, as I mentioned earlier, as soon as Pearl Harbor hit, several of my fraternity brothers quit school and enlisted. I had friends who had minor disabilities that tried to get in the service and couldn't. And so they tried another branch of service and lied about their disabilities to get in. People wanted to be in. And the civilians made a total sacrifice for the thing. There was rationing. Their husbands and sons were in the service. The women took jobs that they didn't particularly like, but they were necessary for it. One experience that I had that really made it live is how much it was an all-out effort by the people. Before we went overseas, our unit was called to Philadelphia. We bivouacked in Fairmount Park in Philadelphia, and there was a trolley car strike. And riding the trolley cars was very important to the war effort. Most of the people who worked in war industries got to work in the trolley cars. So our job was to make sure the trolley cars ran. And I marched my troops down to the terminal, and I'd put a soldier or two on each trolley car so that they could make sure they'd make the run. At the end of the run, they came off with bushel baskets of money, candies, bottles of milk, and so forth. The hearts of the people just went out tremendously.
Contrast that with your experience in Vietnam.
Yeah. That was not a shared experience. In fact, let me describe one moment. I came home from the third mission of the day in these greasy old helicopters, and I remember being handed my mail as I stepped off the helicopter and opened an envelope, and it was full of news, and one of the bits of news was that Tufts was throwing the ROTC unit off campus.
No recruiting on my
man,
campus.
That was it. No recruiting, and get this ROTC, which had been my path to success, and those were some bitter times. An amusing turn in all of that is that for each of us that served in Vietnam, there are two others who claim to have served. So all of those people
Is that like claiming you're Irish on St. Patrick's Day?
Apparently it is on that day, but I get great satisfaction out of that. But nobody ever spit on me, but I mean, that literally happened. People would get off the airplanes in LA or San Francisco in uniform, and the trick was to get out of that uniform as quickly as you can. And none of us were ashamed. In fact, when they talk to veterans now, 90-some% of us are very proud that we served there. And of course, the war is being revised in literature.
Attitudes are changing.
Attitudes are certainly changing, indeed. But watching the way my younger colleagues are treated is wonderful.
I was going to ask Maggie Kwok, did you receive the support that you needed during your deployment and after, and what kind of reception when you entered and left the military?
I feel like we had a lot of support, so it was opposite from Vietnam, but it was similar to kind of like the Second World War, where people supported the troops. And it's funny because they say we don't support the war but support the troops, and at first I was like, oh, that's nice, but then I was thinking, but the troops are fighting, whether they're in the war, so you're not supporting what they're doing, but you're supporting it's kind of like an oxymoron, I feel, when they say we don't support the war, but we support the troops.
What's your reaction to what she's saying?
Well, again, that's a very different thing, because somehow or other, there were a lot of draftees in Vietnam, and they suffered the same treatment back in the world, as we called it, that those of us who were professionals suffered. And hey, if you don't like the war, that's fine, but don't spit on the individuals who are fighting it. That was
don't kill the messenger kind of thing.
Don't shoot the messenger, right? And of course, there's a lot of controversy about who was telling the truth about what was going on over there at the time as well. So it was a very difficult time to be a professional military person. But those of us, my generation, again, most of us look back now and say we did the right thing.
What, Murray Schoenholtz, is your proudest wartime accomplishment? Does something stand out?
No, I'm proud I served my country, but actually, when I was over there, I was thinking, boy, I can't wait till they rotate me and I can get out of service. I was anxious to get out and get on with going to school.
I imagine you felt the same way.
Oh, yes. But I wasn't sure of myself as a young person. I didn't know if I was intelligent enough to do some of the things and so forth. And I was given responsibilities that I would never have been given otherwise. And the fact that I met those responsibilities really made me very proud. And that was a shining time in my military career. It was important for me to find myself, sort of.
I mentioned a moment ago that you said I didn't meet anybody in combat who wanted to be a hero. We were scared to death. And I'm wondering, how did you cope with the fear of missions or battles?
Well, we were all in it together. We had a job to do, and we didn't ever stop to think of not doing the job. So it was how to do the job and do it well. So it just kept us going.
And how about for you, Colonel Watt?
You can tell how important flying these old H-37s was to me. These were helicopters that were pioneering in their development and were at the end of their service life. The H-46, which is still flying, was just being introduced, and there were some struggles getting it started. So we kept month to month. They'd say, "Yeah, you guys got to fly another month." So there was just huge satisfaction with the 6 or 7 of us who were left in the Marine Corps, who were current in that flying machine, getting these things airborne every day for 3 or 4 missions and doing the things we did, hauling troops, hauling supplies.
And the things you did in Vietnam and then later as a test pilot have made a huge difference in what was available for those who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Well, I'd like to think so. Thank you for that. But yeah, the test flying, talk about satisfaction. I hit a moment where I was fresh out of flying helicopters in combat and had the engineering degree, and my monitor, detailer as they call them in the Navy, recognized this and said, "Why haven't you applied for the test pilot school?" And I said, "I don't know, let's look at the requirements," and I was off that. So that was good. And there was the feeling that I was strongly suggesting modifications to the new flying machines that were coming along. The Cobra, the Marine Corps' version of the Cobra was one that I tested, and I felt like I made a difference on. Yeah, that was a very nice connection between combat tours, I should say.
I'm curious to know what the single most fearsome weapon the enemy used against you when you were in Vietnam.
There are, it's really old stuff. The lesson, we learned a very interesting lesson one day. The H-37 had clamshell doors on the front which opened, and you find a definition of eternity as how long it takes to close them when the first mortar round lands in the zone. So we were in the zone that had been a friendly place, and it turned very unfriendly one day, and we had that 6 or 8 seconds to get these doors closed and fly the flying machine out of there. So it wasn't anything particularly sophisticated, but the North Vietnamese, this was a few miles south of the DMZ. Just a basic old mortar was what we feared. So it wasn't while we were airborne, it's those moments when we were sitting on the ground that were most exciting.
You had several very close calls.
Well, the weapon that we feared the most was the 88, the artillery piece. It was a very accurate, and they seemed to be everywhere. and we did a lot of our fighting in forests, and we got tree bursts, and that was a devastating situation. So the enemy was, the Germans were well suited for combat. I mean, they had really prepared and had in the early part of the war superior equipment to what we had. Later part of the war, we caught up with them.
You know, I was curious because I've read, and I'm sure you all have read, about Japanese soldiers who decades later were still in hiding, believing that World War II was still going on. And that gave me kind of a sense of the men you were fighting who had this commitment. Do you ever stop and think about your adversary and the kind of commitment they had?
It's hard to defeat an enemy who has so little to lose. I mean, and that the Japanese, I think we're that way. The North Vietnamese, and to a certain extent, I think we're facing that in the desert with people who would just as soon be dead as alive. It makes for a very tough enemy.
And we had the opposite situation. The German soldiers that we took them as prisoners, they were like the people in Lancaster.
Yeah.
They were German, very much like we were, and had the desire to live as much as we did. It was a different kind of enemy.
And in fact, tell the story if you would. You're traveling in a Jeep.
Yeah, this was my, you know, the human capacity to forget is our best capacity. And most of us that come out of combat are able to forget most of the things, the devastation we saw. I have one item that sticks with me, and I can still relive it when I think about it. It was after I was promoted to Battalion S2 intelligence officer. My Jeep driver and I were driving along a road. We stopped a Polish man who was a displaced person and asked him if there were any Germans nearby, and he said no. 100 yards down the road, I suddenly heard a Panzerfaust go over the top of the Jeep. That's a grenade that the Germans had that had a handle on it. So you threw it like this, and it went, and it gave a particular sound. It went right over the top of our Jeep. So my Jeep driver and I jumped out of the Jeep at the same time, and I climbed over a fence. The next day I looked at the fence. I would have had trouble climbing over it, but I was motivated. And I found myself on a long hillside, quite steep, maybe 50 yards long. At the bottom there was a river, and there were small shrubs along this place. And I started to make my way back from where the Jeep was up on the road, and I was being fired at from across the river. And I got grazed across an eye, and it closed an eye. And I got back maybe 75 yards, and I ran into a brush pile that I couldn't get through. The German foresters cleaned their foresters out, and this is where they dumped it over from the road, and I couldn't go any farther. So I was stuck, and I was...
And you had a pocket full of German medals and a German gun on you.
I was probably 10 yards down from the road, and I was lying face down holding on to a shrub because it was a steep embankment when I heard the Germans send somebody down to find me. And the German came down, and I suddenly realized I was going to be taken prisoner. That was what I assumed. And I had a pocket full of German medals I had taken over prisoner, some Iron Crosses, and I didn't want to be caught with those, so I buried those. And I happened to be carrying a German pistol, and I didn't want to be captured with that, so I got rid of that. And the German came down, and he stood next to me. I could have reached out and touched his feet. And I was expecting to be taken prisoner. Then he cocked his gun, and he fired it. And literally, I wondered what the bullets were going to feel. He apparently had had enough of the war and decided not to kill me. And that one I still lived through. When I think of still wondering what those bullets were going to feel like as they went through my back. He walked up to the road and
pretended he shot you?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Is there something that sticks with you, a story that sticks with you?
I guess one event that will always resonate with me and I always think of when it's kind of a negative event about Iraq. Like I went to the main hospital from our battalion aid station to pick up some supplies, and I walked right through the ER, and it was busy, but there was only one patient there, and it turns out it was a Marine who an insurgent sniper had taken a shot at, and he was shot in the head, and they were trying to save him. But I remember hearing the doctor said, there's gray matter, there's nothing we can do. They pronounced it, pulled a wool blanket over his head, American flag, and walked him out of the ER. And I remember everybody was just standing at attention. It was quiet. And then when it was all over, I looked across the ER and I saw one of my old chiefs that I worked under when we were back in the States. And I went over to him and I talked to him a little bit. He's like, "Oh, that was one of my Marines. They had just brought him in, medevaced him in." And it was just something that I'm like, I think that was like my second month there. And so it kind of hit me like, okay, this is real. I mean, I knew it was real, but that was a real moment, not like surrounding all my other surreal moments when I was in.
If there's a day or a series of days I couldn't forget, get into Maggie's turf a little bit here, they categorize medevacs by seriousness and urgency, and there's a category called the permanent routine, which means they're dead. You know, you don't kill yourself getting in here to rescue. And we weren't in the medevac business with these big old greasy helicopters, but after days of bad weather, we had to fly back in similar area, close to where I described the mortar incident, and haul out body bags. And you don't ever forget that. I mean, this is, every sense is there. You know, round trips of a big helicopter full of body bags after a very bad battle. That's not something, I don't have nightmares about it, but I'll never forget that set of sensations.
What was it like for all of you to readjust? Now, you had 3 years of service, 2 years of service, 5.5 years of service, 26.5 years of service. What is that, 37 years combined? What was it like to readjust to society when you came back after those 3 years?
Well, after combat was over, unless we had enough points to come home, we got other jobs. And
unless we had enough points to come home.
Yeah, well, you got points for the length of time you were in service, whether you were in combat or not, and so forth. And there was a threshold. If you had enough points, they sent you home. If you didn't have enough points, you stayed until your number of points was eligible to be sent home. And since I didn't get over into Germany until October of '44, I didn't have as many points as some other people. So I got sent to Berlin on occupation duty. And the regimental colonel said, would you like to be the club officer? Now, when the colonel says, would you like to be, that means you are the club officer. And I ran an officers club and 4 enlisted men's clubs. So I'm working my way back towards civilian life. And that was the hardest job I ever had in the service. If you don't think finding beer for the whole regiment isn't a tough job. But so, it was a gradual step to come back to civilization. We ran dances, special dances. We had an orchestra and the things that you would do in civilian life.
So soldiers drank beer?
The enlisted men's clubs, we would get as much beer as we could, and we'd turn all the taps on. And the club closed when the taps went dry. And sometimes it was an hour and a half. Sometimes it was 3 hours. And the supply system was really tough in Berlin.
How about for you, Maggie?
I guess one of the biggest things about readjustment was driving. Our medical truck was a stick. So driving on base, I had to readjust from shift truck to an automatic Honda Civic, so that was kind of different. And also seeing trash or ripped up tires on the California freeway kind of made me a little anxious, because when we're out there in the desert, that's where they would hide IEDs, and ripped up tires, trash. And so I knew in Southern California, there weren't any terrorists out there trying to blow up cars on the freeway, but it still kind of triggers like that, not muscle memory, I guess muscle memory or training. And I would drive and I kind of swerve and I'm like, okay, I can't do this on the 10. I'll cause an accident, It's not like in Iraq where there's nobody around you. So that was one of the things I had to readjust. And it took about a month or so before I started realizing that that actually is just trash and those are just old tires on the road.
What was readjustment for you?
Actually, I was anxious to get home, and then it was a wonderful thing for the country. They had the GI Bill, which gave a whole generation opportunity to go to college, and went to school. And it was.
What did you miss most? I'm curious to know what living conditions were like. What you missed most about home while you were deployed.
Well, the food wasn't too great, and living conditions weren't too good. And I'll tell you, I still remember that cold weather. Couldn't wait to get home. I think most people, wanted to get on with their lives.
There are countless war movies. Is there a war movie that resonates with you for one reason or another?
I think that Tora was a wonderful movie.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. There's Hurt Locker, which is, a year or two old now. Got a lot of criticism.
Oh, yeah.
But there were some moments in that, particularly where the explosive ordnance guy came home and went through the attempted readjustment, and then the next thing he's back signing up for another year or whatever it was. Those of us who had that first day home experience where, particularly, not to take away from those years, but when you were coming home to a hostile environment, the adjustment was, that was very well done for that sort of 5 minutes of the movie.
Well, Saving Private Ryan was as close to reality as I had seen.
And in fact, you ran into your brother, literally on a bridge in Germany. And
well, the bridge at Remagen was the only bridge that the Germans were unable to blow up going across the Rhine River. The Rhine River was wide, deep, and swift, and it was a horrible thought to get troops to cross that river. So when a group of soldiers saw that this bridge hadn't been blown up, they stormed across the bridge and captured the Germans and kept them from blowing up the bridge, although they did set off a couple of detonations. When General Eisenhower found out about this, he got all the troops possible to go to Remagen and get across the bridge. And I started to see Jeeps with my brother's unit insignia on the bumper. And sure enough, my brother comes driving along in a Jeep. He also was an infantry officer. We had time to get out, hug, go back to war. We were able to get 8,000 troops across that bridge in the first 24 hours. And the bridge was under artillery attack constantly. And when our unit went across, it would go across the bridge, turn left, and attack. And we got a beachhead established pretty quickly, and that really was the end of the German war. From there on, we waited for the Russians to finish it up.
You also met up with your brother in Korea, which is just astounding, such a small world kind of experience.
Yeah, he was a medical corpsman with the 3rd Division, and I was in the 2nd Division, and we were corresponding, and I says, well, I'll meet you, which is, really very heartwarming.
A piece of home when you're in a place like Korea. And actually, all of you have been involved in some way in either communicating with others, or you've written a series of vignettes about your experiences. You have been involved in the Penn State Student Veteran Organization. You wrote something for your grandchildren. I'm just kind of curious to know why you started writing about it and what it's meant to you to do it.
It was about 35 years after. I'm writing those incidents and recalling them 35 years later. So
you didn't keep a diary.
No, but I have my log books and I can track where I was and get sort of factual information. But recalling the conversations, we all have memory problems. She doesn't yet. I was amazed at how I could recall specific conversations and moments in those incidents. And I picked out my favorite stories, of course. Who did I write for? I was writing for myself. I wanted to get all this down, and I had some time. I had sold my company, and I had a little spare time, and it was just hugely satisfying to get those things written. And not a lot of people read them, but it's all right. It's there. So.
Do you relive in a way the experience?
It was. It lit a whole lot of the old thoughts. And again, I kind of focused on the positive side. So it was very pleasing, I guess, a very positive experience to have done that writing.
How about you? Did you write home when you were deployed? And this is a different thing. I mean, you wrote after the fact, 35 years after the fact, but...
I wrote, emails because we,
yes.
The technology was vastly different. Different ways that you could communicate and keep in touch with the outside world, I guess. And, there was internet, so we could read the news, see what's happening on CNN, Fox, and what they was saying, what was happening in the war, different
Did it look very different to you, what you saw on CNN and elsewhere?
It did, because they didn't really show every single aspect of what was going on in the war. They focused mostly on, the big combats that were happening, or they didn't focus. I found that it was kind of sad that they didn't focus on some of the humanitarian things that we were doing over there too. So
you're nodding your head. Did you feel the media was?
You want to go down? Step into that swamp. It was popular to say that the government was lying to its citizens about what was going on in Vietnam, but in fact, the press was, the networks were. It was, how do I say? Demoralizing to come home and then turn on the TV and see what was being said about the situations we just left.
Were there moments where you thought, we're not going to win this? For either you in World War II or in Korea?
Yeah, by the time I got into the war, which was later than some of the people from the beginning, who must have been frustrated. People went through Africa and so forth. It must have been very frustrating. After D-Day, and we moved through France pretty quickly, we got stymied at the German border. But we kept moving forward, and we assumed that it was coming to an end. It was just time. They were running out of material, too.
How about in Korea? Did you ever have doubts about the outcome?
Well, I don't. I don't think our country really wanted a victory there. I mean, there's no such thing as victory. They were just trying to have a stalemate and have peace. Country was divided. I mean, what would you win? That's the problem.
Do you look back on the conflicts differently? I know you said somewhere that even today you looked at Vietnam as winnable, and still do.
I suppose in the 40 years that have passed, they've swung back toward capitalism over there. So there's that side, but it's still a communist country. And what is annoying, I guess that's not a strong enough word, but we'll go with that, is that we could have won that. And the recent books would certainly substantiate that. This unwinnable war concept was fabrication. Yeah, so that'll always bother me.
You were all in such interesting places. Did you learn anything interesting about the culture having been there?
Well, let me say this, the Vietnamese people are wonderful, and we were training South Vietnamese officers here, so we knew. I went through the basic school with South Vietnamese officers, and they're just fine people.
I remember when I was in Korea, I don't remember seeing one paved road. And I mean, not a very pretty country, but I understand today it's booming.
How about you, Maggie? Being
well,
in
I
Iraq?
guess after the military learned, after all these different wars, and new tactics and new strategies came into place. Like they basically redid all the strategy and tactics that we have used for previous wars. I actually did an internship with the International Center for the Study of Terrorism here on campus. And I looked at some of the strategies and tactics that we had used in Vietnam, like guerrilla warfare. I read a couple books on there, had to do some research on that. And we had to learn about the culture before we went over there. And so they did a lot of classes for us so we could learn about the culture and learn about the people. And the people, they're people just like me and you, and the civilians there were nice, they were friendly, and if you respected their culture, they would come and talk to you. If you didn't I guess, give off like an aggressive or violent kind of aura, you know, they were open and friendly, most of them. So.
Do you have anything to add to that? Right?
Once again, we were dealing with people that were very much like we were. As I said, they were like people from Lancaster, the Germans, the culture. Now they had, by the time we got there, they had shortages of all kinds, so that their lifestyle was quite different than it had been. But it was obvious with the civilians that they wanted us to come in and win the war and get it over with. Same thing with some of the German troops, except where there were SS people who were holding pistols at their head if they didn't continue to fight. So in many ways, it was friendly enemy. It's a funny way to put it, but because they were shooting at us. Now, a negative, I was interviewed by 3 different television stations afterward, German television stations, and they asked some reasonable questions about service and so forth. But all 3 of them asked me the same question, ultimately. How did you feel about killing German soldiers? Now, that's a terrible question. I said, they were shooting at me and I was shooting at them. That's the only answer you could give. It was kill or be killed. But the people there, I mean, the take that the mayor had that we saved a lot of lives by our aggressive action in Germany was the prevalent attitude.
You know, going back to what you were saying about how some of the SS held guns to some of the German civilians, like they had to do what they told them to, otherwise they would kill them or their family. It was the same in Iraq. You know, there were some, what we called insurgents, who had to do what the insurgents told them to do, like, or we'll kill your family, or here's, you know, $500, go place this IED into the ground, you know, and then that's it. And then a lot of them, you know, it's a poor country, they didn't have any money, so they're like, okay, $500, I can go do that, you know, and then they get captured, and then we realize he's not really an insurgent, he was just paid, or they kidnapped his family and told him he had to do it. So, you know,
identifying the enemy was certainly more difficult.
It was very difficult.
And you've been back to Germany.
Yes. In
recently.
2005, our division sponsored a battlefield tour back to Germany. And there were, we had a busload. There were 19 of us veterans from 78th Division. I did not know any of the people, but we all shared the same experience, so it was very interesting. There were about 50 of us on the bus altogether. We visited a lot of the battlefields in which we fought. We went to a couple of cemeteries, one in Belgium and one in Holland. Each of them had 8,000 graves. I visited the graves of some of the people that were that I knew. It was a marvelous experience. In the city of Wuppertal, each time we went someplace, one of the veterans had a job to do. And we were guests of the mayor of Wuppertal. Wuppertal was quite a large city that we had captured. And the mayor had us for lunch, and then we went to his chambers, and there were 3 groups of people in the chambers. Our 50 people from our busload, a group of Germans who some of them had fought against us, and a group of Russian displaced persons. These were prisoners of the Germans from the 1930s, and they were still there because they couldn't go back to their home country. And just imagine the hardships they had gone through, and I thought it was marvelous that the mayor had invited them. And at that particular occasion, I drew the short straw, so I had to do something, and they asked me to talk, and so I talked about the good German who didn't kill me, which I thought would be a popular one. It was the first time I gave a speech where I'd say a paragraph, and it would be translated in German, and then it would be translated in Russian. It was kind of an interesting thing. Another memory I have is that the mayor was 6'10", and I'm 5'5", and I could barely see over the rostrum to give my talk. But he made a statement that he thanked us for liberating his city, and I thought we captured it, you know. So I talked to a German high school student And I said, I don't understand this liberating. I thought we captured it. And he said, we're taught in schools that you liberated us from the Nazis. And I thought that was an interesting twist to what they were thinking. Because although everyone claimed not to be a Nazi, if you look at the movies and saw the adoration that people had for Hitler, there were a lot more Nazis than came out of the woodwork after the war was over. Yeah.
You all were volunteers. In some ways, there wasn't a choice in a way. But I'm wondering, this past July 2011, we celebrated the 38th anniversary of an all-volunteer army. And I'm wondering if you feel that's still the way to go.
I was a skeptic in the beginning of that.
You didn't think it would last?
I didn't think it would work. And there's still the side of me that feels like people ought to be required to do some kind of government service. But I got to say, it's been wonderful. The quality of all the services now is just absolutely excellent. So I give the whole thing very high grades.
How about you, Maggie Quagg?
I don't know, because I feel like the military instilled so much discipline in me that I don't think I would have ever gotten anywhere else. And I agree with Colonel Watt, like that there should be some type of government service, and it's so I'm kind of on the fence. I feel, because reading articles like, was it 38% of our youth can't join the military because they're overweight, or if they, that just really upsets me. I'm just like, is there something we can do? Like, I'm sure we couldn't force everybody to do what Israel does, but I just wish there was something that has to be done or could be done for this. Does that make sense?
Sure. The all-volunteer army, how do you feel about it?
Well, I think it's great that we have an all-volunteer thing, but I agree also that the discipline that you get from being in the service is a marvelous thing, and some kind of compulsory service, I think, we would have a better group of young people as a result of that, in my judgment.
Everybody should have responsibility serving 2 years for the country when they graduate from high school, unless, hardship or medical. But it would make everybody equal in terms of whatever their plans are. I think you'd have a better feeling for your country and patriotism, and everyone should serve.
I'm curious how different it is to be sitting at this table talking about war, and there's a woman at the table. Maggie Quagg.
We mentioned that. Yeah, we said, what a shock when you see a woman as a veteran.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
It is wonderful.
Why not?
Why not? Go ahead.
Oh, no, go.
There's an interesting thing going on at the Naval Academy. As you approach graduation, you can choose between the Navy and the Marine Corps, as I did in the ROTC. And there used to be a limit, I think it was 16%. But the women at the Naval Academy, half of the women are choosing the Marine Corps, which I think is just wonderful.
We're talking because of Veterans Day, which of course Veterans Day was established after World War I, which was to be the war to end all wars. But I'm wondering what your take is on Veterans Day. What should we be doing on Veterans Day, and how do you spend Veterans Day?
Well, this is one of the things that's had such a positive change. It's a day to thank veterans, and I wish I had captured the moment when someone first said to me, "Thank you for your service." I'm sure I said, "What? Excuse me." That was a long time after Vietnam when that started. And what a wonderful thing to just pat a veteran on the back and say thank you for your service. It's a one-on-one kind of thing, in my view. Doesn't have to be some huge celebration.
It's kind of awkward sometimes when people, I guess my generation, the one, a lot of veterans that that are my age that I hang out with and that are my friends, and for us it's kind of awkward when they say thank you for your service. We're just like, oh, it was our job. Nobody forced us to sign that paper to say, yes, we'll give 4+ years to Uncle Sam. It was our job, and we did it, and now we're back. So for us, it's kind of awkward.
Interesting.
I hadn't thought of that.
Well, an infantry company is made up of about 180 soldiers, 6 of which are officers. And my company was in combat for a total of 127 days. I wasn't with them all that time because I was in the hospital part of the time, and I got promoted to the battalion staff. In that 125 days, 47 of the soldiers were killed in action. Probably 4 or 5 times that number were wounded. And the numbers are not clear because we got a replacement for someone that was wounded, then that person got wounded, and then got another replacement, so the numbers are pretty hard to come by. So Veterans Day has a very special meaning to me because I remember that was my company and those were the figures. I celebrate Veterans Day every day. Another gentleman and I do musical shows on Veterans Day, and we're doing one again this year. We've done this for about the last 10 years.
I think it's very fitting that people are honored for their service, veterans. It's a nice feeling.
I was going to say also, every year on campus, the Veterans Organization does a Veterans Day ceremony on Main in front of Old Main. And, I know I say it's awkward when people thank us, but I think what we mostly do it for is for the younger generation, because they're not aware. A lot of, I met a girl who, when I told her I was a vet, she asked me, "Oh, you mean like a veterinarian?" And she told me she liked horses. I'm like, "No, I'm a veteran." A lot of, I guess, the younger generation aren't really aware, especially now with the GI Bill that's coming out. A lot of people are getting out of the service and going to school. They don't realize that 22-year-old kid sitting next to you in biology, was just overseas in Afghanistan 6 months ago. And so I guess for us, when we celebrate Veterans Day for our generation, it's kind of like an awareness, that we're here, and just
we're here literally all around you, and you just don't recognize
exactly.
it.
And
what advice does each of you have for those coming up who will be entering the military or considering thinking about it?
Oh, do it. I mean, this is what everybody said. If it's not compulsory, make it personally compulsory to serve your country in uniform. It's just a wonderful thing.
I agree. Whether you do it after high school or after college, I think if you want to do it, just go for it.
You will grow up faster with those experiences in the service than you will in any civilian thing in that same time frame.
Mm-hmm. I think it'll be very rewarding. You'll meet a lot of people, and have a different viewpoint of the world.
Yeah, you see things so differently, Like going to school, with the, I started at Penn State when I was 23, and then everybody else in a lot of my classes were freshmen, 18, 19, and our views were just totally different. I took a lot of political science classes, so imagine like some of the arguments we got into and some of my opinions, and they're like, "Oh, I never thought of it like that," and it's very interesting.
I have a letter sitting in front of me. It's a letter that my brothers and sisters and I found in my father's wallet when he died. Had no idea he was carrying this letter around. It's dated February 21st, 1943. He would have been 15 and a half at the time. And it turns out that the person who wrote this letter died in World War II. And I'm just going to read a little piece of it where this friend says, "If you ever have the misfortune to get in the Army, for goodness sakes, don't get in the infantry if you can help it. I hope by the time you're old enough for the Army, this madness will be over. If you know any, say a few prayers for the boys over here." And then it's signed by his friend. And I was just so kind of surprised that he had this this letter and that we didn't know about it. My mother filled in some of the blanks. But I'm wondering, is there some memento, something that each of you has that is a reminder of what you've experienced?
The first time I was wounded, I was in the middle of what had been the battlefield, and the troops had moved on, and the medic came to treat my wound, and he had to cut my uniform, piece out of the uniform, and for some reason I said, "Give that to me," and I put it in my pocket, and I still have it. It's a memento. This part of my trousers with the bullet holes in from the machine gun, and that's a crazy memento to have, but I hope my grandchildren revere that piece of history.
A memento that you brought home from?
Frankly, I never really think about it until we have occasions like this where I sit down or I bump into a veteran, you know, and we start talking. But otherwise, I don't.
My second tour, I was flying A4s, which is now an obsolete in the museum with all the other machines I've flown. But we needed every foot of that runway at Da Nang on these 125-degree days. And I can still see these two strips of barbed wire, this fence that was across the south end of the flying field at Da Nang, because it was right there, because I had just got the wheels off the runway. So rereading that to get ready for this, that was I mean, this is great stuff. This isn't a bad memory of looking down and saying, this flying machine did it again. It was just amazing. So
Just made it over the barbed wire fence.
right. Not making that sound more dramatic than it was, but you know.
It sounded like there wasn't enough runway really.
Another couple thousand feet of runway would have been a wonderful thing on some of those days, but it was great flying. Very satisfying stuff. So rereading, I guess I've created my mementos by doing some of that writing.
Well, I'd like to thank all of you for your service. Ray Fortunato, who served in World War II, Murray Schoenholtz, who served in the Korean War, Louis Watt, who served in Vietnam, and Maggie Kwok, who served in Iraq. Thank you all again. I hope you enjoyed our special Veterans Day conversation. Comcast subscribers can watch this program anytime on Penn State On Demand. Find out how through our website, conversations.psu.edu, where you'll also find more information on our local veterans and the conflicts they served in. I'm Patty Satalia. We hope you'll join us for our next Conversation from Penn State. And to all of our veterans, thank you for serving.
If you've enjoyed Conversations from Penn State and would like to purchase a DVD of this show or any of our other episodes, order online at mediasales.psu.edu or call 1-800-770-2111.
Production funding provided in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you. Thank you.
This has been a production of WPSU.